Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
With Tiana's Bayou adventure now finally upon us after 4 long years of waiting, many fans of Disney World and its attractions have agreed that the animatronics, the music, the theming, and the story are all pretty good and have led to a great addition to the Magic Kingdom. However, there are other fans of the parks, as well as fans of the original Princess and the Frog film, that say Disney has lost their touch, particularly with their ability to tell a story with their rides. Now, I am not here to tell those fans that they are wrong for feeling this way. Of course, everybody is entitled to their own opinions. But today, I am here to look at those arguments and see how much they actually hold up, to see if they are actual critiques on Disney and its attractions, or just people hating on Disney just to hate for no reason. Now, the most important thing when figuring all of this out is to look at what Disney World rides do stories right, and which rides do stories wrong. When I hear Disney World rides with a good story, I, like many others, think of 3 rides in particular: the Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Rise of the Resistance. There are more examples, of course, but these are definitely the big 3 for me at least. And the alternatives would probably be Seas with Nemo and Friends, as well as Cali River Rapids, and I'll get to them later. But before that, there are 3 more ride types that exist, and they are just as important when talking about this topic as the others, at least to some degree. Rides that have 0 story, rides that have a story but the actual experience is what you're waiting for, and rides that simply take guests through the plot of the films that they are based on. And it's that last one that I want to focus on the most when talking about the issues with Tiana's Bayou adventure, but again, I will come back to that later. First, let's look at the big 3 of Disney World story rides and see what characteristics they share that make them all so great at telling a story. All 3 begin their story in their cues. With the Haunted Mansion, you're walking through a graveyard, but there's clearly something more going on. There's a horse-drawn carriage, but with no horse in sight. A gravestone that opens its eyes and looks directly at you. With Pirates of the Caribbean, you're walking into a Spanish fort piled up with supplies, including things like weaponry and cannons. And with Rise of the Resistance, you walk through a hidden resistance base, and you see more and more things like flight suits and weaponry used in the story against the First Order. There's a whole other thing about how lighting and music and even the temperature pumped in affects the overall tone, and those are definitely important, and I will get to them later, but I'm just going to focus on the story for right now, and I don't want this video, to get too long. Pirates of the Caribbean doesn't have a pre-show, so I will put a pin in that one and talk about the pre-shows for the Haunted Mansion and Rise of the Resistance. With the Haunted Mansion, the stretching room sets the tone as the ghost host narration starts. The room begins to morph and stretch and change, and we literally see his body hanging from the ceiling. It shows us that this isn't going to be the fun and whimsical Disney that we're usually used to, and while most of us aren't terrified, we still feel that creeping and unnerving feeling. Meanwhile, Rise of the Resistance is just going absolutely crazy with Star Wars. And we're led into a war meeting with Rey and BB-8, we're led onto a ship that is attacked and captured by the First Order, and we're once again led into an interrogation room. This pre-show sets the tone of us being caught in the middle of this galaxy-wide conflict that could end in life or death. At this point, Pirates of the Caribbean meets back up with the other 2, and we board our ride vehicles, after a literal wall is cut out in Rise of the Resistance. And now, we enjoy the rides we have been waiting 45 minutes to 2 hours for. With Pirates of the Caribbean, we see the remains of pirates long forgotten, before falling back to their golden age, as we see a crew led by Captain Barbossa pillage and plunder a city while searching for Captain Jack Sparrow. With the Haunted Mansion, we travel through the halls of this old manor until the spirits that live within it finally show themselves and are seen. There's plenty of discussion on whether or not the Hatbox Ghost in the hallway scene ruins the story of this, but we're not here to talk about that. That's a whole nother video entirely, and I will get to that eventually. And like the pre-show for Rise of the Resistance, you almost die while being attacked by stormtroopers and Kylo Ren. So, now we know the key to a Disney World ride having a great story is having a linear story as well as a distinctive tone and vibe that is built up to throughout the queue and pre-show, and then finally is blown up with the actual ride. But now let's talk about the bad examples, the Seas with Nemo and Friends, and what we're starting with, Kali River Rapids. Starting with the queue of Kali River Rapids, it actually has a pretty good one. While it's certainly no Haunted Mansion and no Tower of Terror, it does do a really good job at establishing the vibe for the ride with the Indian culture all throughout. It's just that the ride itself fails to capture that same essence. With only one show scene, the deforestation scene, it's clear that this was intended to have a story that delivered a very good message. We need to take care of our environment. The message that all of Animal Kingdom is also trying to teach us. This could have been the pinnacle Animal Kingdom ride, but it completely fell short. The one show scene feels random and completely out of place, and the ride itself, being a Rapids ride, is terrible compared to the other Rapids rides, like Smoky Mountain River Rampage at Dollywood. That is how you do a River Rapids ride. And it's kind of funny to think that Dolly Parton outdid both Disney and Universal at their own game. Oh, but remember that comment I made a few seconds ago about Kali River Rapids queue actually being good? Well, scratch that and throw it out the window because it doesn't match the ride at all. Yes, it does a good job at showing the culture in India, but it doesn't have anything to do with deforestation. You see, the original idea for this ride was basically Kilimanjaro safaris, but for Asian animals and also a River Rapids ride. That's an amazing idea. But then because of budget cuts, because of the recession happening at the time, the ride was downgraded a lot. But if it was so downgraded that this was the best you could do, why do it at all at that point? Change it up completely, just make it a Rapids ride. I know I praise Disney for their theming, but this is just pointless at this point. Like I said, it had the potential to be the Animal Kingdom ride, but just not the money to do it. And that's just disappointing. But you know what else is an example of what not to do when making a ride story? The Seas with Nemo and Friends. Starting with the queue is fine, I guess. It's not very detailed, but it's kind of fun since you slowly go underwater progressively. Then you get onto an Omnimover. Me and the boys love Omnimovers. And the story is just completely lost. It's just Nemo pretending to be lost again, which is so mean to his dad. Why would you do that to him? And then it just kind of ends with them finding him and, hey, here's an aquarium. Compare this to the original ride, The Seas. It was a marine educational ride that fit the original identity of Epcot that ended fittingly with the aquarium. Obviously, that was a ride that kinda has a story, but it's more about the actual experience. And with Nemo, if you're just gonna have him be lost again, why not just take us through the plot of Finding Nemo? And that brings me to the other three types of rides. Rides that have no story, rides that have a story, but guests aren't really waiting for that, they're waiting for the experience, and rides that have a story, but not because the Imagineers came up with it, but because it just takes us through the plot of the movie it's based on. An example of a story nobody really cares about is Expedition Everest. The queue sets up the danger and cultural significance of the Yeti before we encounter it and have to make a crazy escape. But we aren't there for that. I guarantee that most guests don't even pick up on the queue setting it all up. We're waiting long waits in order to experience a thrilling roller coaster with a close encounter with a Yeti. Then there's rides that have no story whatsoever, like Dumbo or the Flying Carpets of Aladdin, and rides that are just movie plots like most of Fantasyland. So what do these concepts do right, and what do these concepts do wrong? With Expedition Everest, it still does have excellent theming, but it shows it doesn't need a full story to be an enjoyable and immersive experience. It can still show the Disney difference without a true, well-defined plot. With the no-story rides, it's mainly just made for littler kids, which is definitely good to have, but not good for this conversation. Tiana was never going to be a ride like that, since it was taking over Splash Mountain. And movie plot rides are self-explanatory, and also not good for showing what Tiana does right or wrong, at least not yet. So now, let's finally look at Tiana's Bayou Adventure, the main character of this whole video. And a very major issue that guests are having with it is that the story is just Tiana getting her special spice. There's no villain, there's no major conflict, nothing big, nothing that pops. Now, you might say they should put it with the Seeds with Nemo and Friends level, but I would actually say this puts it on the same boat as Expedition Everest. Let's start with the ride's queue, which has fun and elaborate and colorful artwork that highlights the music of New Orleans, something seen in the city in real life. Plus, real jazz music is played over speakers in the queue as you see supplies, work areas, and decorations that are all important to Tiana and the 2009 film, including a car from the time period. Compare this to the Expedition Everest queue, which does all of this, but not even really as good. It's still good, but it just kind of throws Yeti stuff in waves at you, which just kind of feels like you're in a Yeti museum more of, except for the little office spaces that kind of show that these are the people sending you on this expedition you're about to go on, except most people don't pick up on that. And Tiana's has office space too, but I feel like it's much better and used more properly because we already know this is a business we're walking into. We know that beforehand. So I feel like it works just better. Plus, Tiana's queue does a very good job at establishing the plot of the ride and the vibe of the ride, something Splash Mountain did a very poor job at, considering you didn't even really realize it had starred talking animals until you were basically at the ride vehicles. But now let's look at the ride itself, which, like Expedition Everest, is more about the experience than the story. Right? That's how it was originally, too. Nobody was riding Splash Mountain for the story of Brer Rabbit. They were going for a fun and thrilling water ride. And while it would have been fun if they took the plot of Princess and the Frog, I personally am glad that they created something new, especially since Splash Mountain's scenes wouldn't have worked as well for the movie. Splash Mountain's scenes are made for one very open and massive scene, something that the scenes for Princess and the Frog don't really have. How many times am I going to say scenes in one sentence? Plus, everybody was asking for the final lift hill to be the Friends on the Other Side scene, but that also wouldn't have worked considering that scene is at the beginning of the film and this lift hill is at the end of the ride, so it would have been weird to put it there anyway. But then why not include a villain or some kind of major antagonist at all? Because that's not what the ride is supposed to be about. In the Princess and the Frog movie, Tiana works incredibly hard for her restaurant, but on her journey, we also see the many aspects of New Orleans and Louisiana, like jazz, the Bayou, voodoo, and Mardi Gras. This ride, while technically a sequel to the film, is more about celebrating that film, seeing Tiana's success fully realized, as well as seeing the important aspects of her home in Louisiana. Yes, a villain would have been more exciting, but not everything needs that, especially since the ride itself is exciting without one. And while it isn't everyone saying this, it feels like many people were expecting it to be a full-on sequel to the original film, even though it's only a ride. It was never going to be on the same level of storytelling and character development as a real-life Princess and the Frog 2. Nor did the marketing make any indication of that being the case. It kind of feels like people who were expecting that were expecting too much. This was never going to be some sort of peak fiction. And then there's also the group that are hating just because they replaced a classic. If I had a nickel for every time a princess replaced an apparent Disney classic,
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
So, where would I rank this ride? Would I put it with Everest like I said I would? Honestly, I would put it in the same category as the Haunted Mansion and Rise of the Resistance, just towards the bottom of that. The queue does a great job at establishing the tone and the story of the ride, much like Pirates of the Caribbean does. And then the ride goes on to tell a good story. While I, like many others, don't think the story is the best story ever told, it's definitely no Haunted Mansion, but it is still really good and really well done. And it has a much more clear story than Expedition Everest does. I definitely think as time goes on, more and more people will start to agree with me, and this ride will be seen as a true classic by many, many people. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day.